has been transmitted to on January 8th, 2019 by the Secretary to the Asbury Park Press, the Independent, and Two River Times, the Township Clerk, and has been posted in the committee conference room and in the Anderson Town Hall entrance, all pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act. If I can ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and please remain standing for a moment of silence. Andy Bayer, would you like to lead us in the pledge, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And a moment of silence on the military who have been wounded or killed in action, and all our police officers who keep us safe every day. Thank you. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Ackerson?
Here.
Mrs. DeMosso?
Here.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
Mrs. LeMountain? Mr. Liao? Mr. Nicholas?
Here.
Mr. Panisi?
Here.
Mr. Renner?
Here.
Mr. Silverman?
Here.
Mr. Castanen?
Here.
Mr. Impresario?
Here.
For the time being, can we sit Mr. Castanings for Mrs. LeMountain? And
Yes.
Oh, is Mauricio coming?
Said he was.
Okay.
So we'll seat them both for...
We'll see them both, one each. Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Castanen for Mr. Liao?
Yes. And then Mr. Impresario for
Mrs. LeMountain?
Mrs. LeMountain. Thank you. Item number 1, I will need to recuse myself from, but the attorney's going to take it.
I'll take it over. So let me just read quickly. This is vote and memorialization on Meridian Quality Care LLC. Second amended preliminary and final site plan for Phase 1. And it's also amended preliminary major site plan for Phase 2. Phase 1 being the assisted living, Phase 2 being the skilled nursing facility over behind the Commons. At the last hearing, we completed the hearing testimony, but we needed just a clarification from our planner for this League of Municipalities. So we were authorized, the board authorized me to prepare a resolution of approval subject to just a clarification from our esteemed planner. And so that's all been done, that's been circulated, it was sent to councils for their review, and we're just here to just clarify the issue, I believe, of the logos, whether they're permitted or not at that specific site.
So the logo prohibition is specific in the resolution to the shopping centers only. So this facility is fully within its rights to provide a logo as part of their sign package. It was only prohibited in the town center and the Commons, and this facility, even though it's part of the whole Lily Tulip development, was not prohibited from allowing logos as part of their sign package. So I think what is proposed is okay and permitted as far as our ordinance is concerned.
And they were just two little minor
Correct.
name logos on the side of the name of this facility.
Exactly.
And then we just were confirming, there was a big question back and forth, what kind of sign is it?
It's a wall
not
sign.
a monument, it's not a
No.
wall sign, but it's just
A site identification sign.
And then we
Correct.
just need a variance because that's not part of anything.
Correct.
In our ordinance.
And technically, the wall, I think, was on the separate lease area, correct?
Not sure.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go out there. But yes, so it is a site identification sign.
It's on a
and
retaining wall.
Correct, on the retaining wall, which needed relief from the board, so yes.
So unless the board has any other questions, Jen, I think you're probably, unless you have questions on the resolution, you're probably ready to take a vote. And Kim's not here, and Serena's conflicted out, so we're going to go to our second vice chair.
So, Marty, you need a motion?
We do need a motion.
I'll make a motion to move.
Roll call.
Second.
Okay, who seconded? All right, okay. Now, first we're going to vote, then we're memorializing, or are we doing it?
We should do it all together.
Okay.
It's already been authorized as by a vote to do this, so let's do it all together. So just to make clear, your motion is to approve the application and the resolution, which has already been authorized.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Nicholas?
Yes.
Mr. Panisi?
Yes.
Mr. Silverman?
Yes.
Mr. Cassidy?
Yes.
That's it. Thanks.
What's your name?
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a public hearing for the master plan reexamination report and the housing plan element and fair share plan. Procedurally, so everyone knows where we are and how it's going to work. Our co-attorney, Andy Bear, will make a presentation, followed by the planner with respect to master plan reexamination report and the housing plan element. And then the questions will be taken from the board once both have done their presentation. And then we will open to questions from the public. If you are represented by counsel, I would ask that you ask your counsel to ask any questions you may have ahead of time. If your counsel has not asked a question, then certainly you may ask it. I would ask that you are not repetitive in your questions. After all questions have been asked, then we will allow for comment. And we're going to ask that you keep your comments brief and, of course, not be repetitive in your comments as well. You can just say, I agree with Mr. Blumenthal, and move on. Okay? So at this time, who wants to go first?
I will start.
Okay.
Thank you. So tonight you have before you your housing element, which incorporates the settlement agreement which the Township Committee previously had approved. It arises from, in 2015, the New Jersey Supreme Court issued an opinion requiring all municipalities that were before a COA, Council on Affordable Housing, to go before the court. Holmdel was traditionally a town that was a COA town. It had an affordable housing plan that was before COA. It had a second round obligation, which is 1987 to 1999 of 768 units. The township satisfied that obligation. And then in 2015, the Supreme Court said any town that wants to continue to meet its obligation for the time period 1999 through 2025 had to go to court. The Township Committee authorized me to go to court on behalf of the township. We've done that. And after extensive negotiations with Fair Share Housing Center, which is a party to every municipal affordable housing litigation throughout the state, we entered into a settlement agreement which provides that the third round obligation is 297 credits. And what you have before you is a plan that only calls for 3 new projects to meet that obligation, which is 93 new affordable housing units and a total of 280 new homes. And that's going to include a project on Route 35, and Jennifer will talk about that, a project on Middle Road, and a project on Palmer Avenue. The township has been very proactive over the years. The township had existing, as I said before, substantial affordable housing already. And we were able to buy, losing my voice, we were able to buy affordable housing. We were able to extend deed controls on 100 units. So we got 100 credits for existing units. So that reduced the obligation. You have an assisted living facility and a group home. And so that's why, even though the obligation, and under COA's regulations, you get bonus credits of 74 units. So that's why, even though your obligation, the township's obligation was 297 units, there's actually only 93 new affordable housing units that are being proposed to meet that obligation.
And a total of 280 rooftops.
Correct. And we are in the process now. The court held a fairness hearing which approved the settlement agreement. It was a hotly contested hearing. It went 8 hours. There was objections filed, and ultimately the court found that and approved the settlement agreement between the township and Fair Share. And it found all the sites that have been proposed as developable and approvable. At this point, we're in the process where the township's under a court order to implement zoning for these sites, and the adoption as well. The court order approving the settlement agreement requires Holmdel, like it does for every other town going through this process, to amend or update its housing element, which is before you right now. So the township's under court order to consider approval of this housing element. If the board doesn't approve this housing element, the township could very well lose control of its right to control zoning and where the affordable housing goes, and the court could strip the township of immunity from builder's remedy. And I've been doing, I know I've talked about this many times in public over the years here, but builder's remedy is a litigation where a developer, property owner comes in and says, town, you didn't meet your obligation. I want to build high-density housing in a site that's not zoned for it. Court order it because township, you didn't meet your obligation. Here in Holmdel, we avoided that. We avoided it because the township wants to control the location and the location of housing and the density. And this,
Remy,
yeah.
just for the record, Vice Chair LaMountain has arrived, and because you're only giving a history and you're not talking about the plan, she'll still be eligible to vote on the plan.
And just to continue that interruption, Bonnie, just to confirm, all the ordinances, I mean, the notices are in fact proper?
Yes.
And no one has a conflict that we're aware of on the dais? I'm sorry, we just had to get that on the
Thank you,
record.
Maureen. Anyway, I'm just about done, but so what you have before you is a plan with Jennifer, which we'll go through. But where we are in the court process is that we had an approved settlement agreement. The court has approved it. We are under court order to adopt a housing element which implements the settlement. So that's what's before you tonight, and I'm available obviously to answer any questions before.
Does anybody have any questions of Mr. Bear?
Yeah. Andy, you talked about the timelines and when it really needs to be approved in terms of the township adopting it?
Like today. We have we are under a court order. So I'm trying to think of the, we have a court order which indicates the township committee is going to consider approval of the zoning ordinances which are part of this housing element on next week.
December 10th.
December 10th. And this is this meaning the housing element is a prerequisite to adoption of those ordinances. So we're under, I mean, this is, as I said, this started in 2015. The court order approving the settlement was, I think Mike has it now, but it was done on, I think, the hearing was in the spring, but it's dated May 1st, I believe. May 1st.
Well, it's received May 1st.
Yeah, it's whatever the stamp is. So the order, that court order says that we were supposed to do this within 120 days of May 1st. We got an extension through the court process. I've gotten a number of extensions. So we're kind of near the...
But I will say, I don't mean to cut you off. The implementation that Andy is referring to needs to take place before the end of this calendar year. The court was not interested in extending that beyond December 31st. So we have this meeting, the township committee only has one meeting, I think, in December, so here we are.
That's why we're here.
Right.
And once it's adopted, is there a timeline on the construction of the units, or?
No, the township's obligation is only to provide for the realistic opportunity. And the way you do that is through zoning. And this is the master plan is a part of the zoning process. And if the committee approves the zoning ordinances, the developers, it's the developer's obligation, or not even obligation, it's the developer's right to move forward with the construction of the units. But if the market isn't right in their view,
It's up to the free market system.
it's up to ultimately. So there is in the settlement agreement with the court, with fair share, a look-back provision where the township has to report back to the court every year, and then a bigger report in 2021 on where we stand with our plan and what's been approved, what's built. But ultimately, it's up to the developer whether they want to build it.
Thank you.
Andy, just one quick question.
Sure.
There are published reports that suggest Holmdel Township participate in what's called RCAs, or Regional Contribution Agreements. Is that possible?
It is not, Deputy Mayor. The issue there is in 2000, they're illegal. In 2008, they've been illegal by state law. for the last 11 years. In 2008, the legislature amended the Fair Housing Act through something called the Roberts Bill, and it outlawed regional contribution agreements. In Holmdel's prior round before 2008, the township did take advantage of those. You used to be able to ship out half your obligation through RCAs. And believe me, Jen and I, if it was still legal, Jennifer and I would be sitting here with regional contribution agreements in hand if it were legal.
And Andy, what happens if we do nothing?
So if we do nothing, as I was saying before, if this does not get approved, the township Fair Share Housing Center has indicated they will file a motion with the court to strip the township of immunity from builder's remedy, and that if that happens, it's a free-for-all, and any property, even properties in southern Holmdel which do not have sewer, could a owner, a property owner, a developer could come in and say, I want to do high-density housing here. I'm the town, you got to do what you got to do to figure out the sewer, but you need to meet your constitutional obligation to provide for your fair share of affordable housing. That is a worst-case scenario for Holmdel.
Who currently owns the 3 properties that we're speaking about?
They're individually owned, they're privately owned. All 3
Oh,
properties, well, all 3 properties are privately owned. We are the township is in the process of taking through eminent domain the property on Middle Road for an 100% municipally sponsored project, but the other 2 properties are owned privately.
By developers or?
Yes.
Andy, one other thing, the 297 number and our obligation with the new residential units is 93. Is there any gray area with the 297, or is that firm, can't be changed?
Well, that's been hotly negotiated. So Fair
It
Shares.
was much higher, right? Correct?
Yeah, Fair Shares expert, that represented a 25-30% reduction off the Fair Share Housing Center's experts number. So if the township had, which is why the committee ultimately decided to resolve the matter, because the risk was, I don't do well with math.
Sure.
What is it?
I got you.
It's about, the obligation, I think Fair Shares expert was in the range of 400.
A little less than 4.
Around
yes.
400.
In the 3s, but in the high
So,
3s.
but if you say that's 100 affordable housing units, then multiply by 5, because if you have a 20% set aside, that would be 500 additional units to create 100 affordable housing units. So the settlement saved the potential of 500 additional affordable housing.
Or total housing.
Yeah.
So 297 number is locked in?
That's it. Like,
That's it. It's
and
not gonna
I
change
will
a year from
say,
now.
for the record, that the township committee has approved the settlement agreement twice already at that number. So that number at this point is the floor. If
Right.
we continue to fight, that number in all likelihood will be increased beyond the 297. Like, that 297 number is the lowest we're gonna get at this point.
But currently, we only have we have a 297 obligation, but because of some things that were
Correct.
done when someone else was in this chair, we've saved some obligation, correct? We have
Yeah,
over 100.
so, and I'll
So
go
why don't
into
you go
this
through those?
in more detail, but to satisfy the 297 unit obligation, as Andy had correctly indicated, we're talking 93 affordable units satisfies a 297 unit affordable unit obligation. It's 280 total units to satisfy a 297 affordable housing unit obligation, which in my experience never happens where the total units is less than the obligation. It's because we had a minimal surplus, which I will go through on the record, plus the town had extended controls, which means units that were deed restricted, right? So in order for units to qualify as affordable, they have to have a deed restriction on them. Historically, in round 1, way back when, in the 80s, it was a 20-year. Into the 90s, it became 30 years. So now there's a 30-year required deed restriction. Those deed restrictions were expiring. The town then approached those owners and said, you know, we will provide you, what I think was what, $10,000 out of our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is important for you guys to understand that that's not taxpayer dollars. That's developer money that goes into an Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So $10,000 per unit if you were to extend your deed restriction for another 30 years. So we're getting credit for 100 units that exist today in town. So there's no new rooftops, they're existing. So that plus there's the 15 bed facility on Stillwell, which I know was a big issue when it was first came in, but I haven't really heard much about it since then. And then the assisted living facility that you guys just approved the sign for, and the generator, et cetera, they've committed to providing 11 Medicaid beds. So between the 4 units surplus from the prior round, the 100 units of extension of controls, the 15 beds in the group home, and the 11 Medicaid beds in the assisted living, we've provided 130 units towards that 297 number right up front. In addition to that, we're eligible for bonus credits, right? Everyone comes up and says, this is great, you can get 2 for 1, 2 for 1. There's a cap on the bonus. You can only get up to 25% of your total obligation as bonus. So we're eligible for 74 bonus credits, which we get. So that's another 74 units, which is why to satisfy 297 unit obligation in this round, we are providing 93 affordable units, 280 total units to get to that 297 obligation. So, I mean, that's a significant, it's a significant fact, because in many instances, to satisfy 500 unit obligation, you're talking about a town that's providing 2,000 units. So it's a significant fact that the number of total new rooftops is less than your overall obligation. That, I think, is a testament to the committee and the fight that they've put up over the course of the past 5 years, and the fact that we've gotten to this point now where we're at the floor. Like 297 is the floor, and we're, you know, pretty much at the floor of how many units we can provide.
Thank you.
So that's kind of where we are.
And Andy, to your point about forcing sewers, are you familiar with Far Hills? What happened there?
In Somerset County? No, well, I think they were, right?
They were forced to put
That
in
was-
sewers, and it cost the town several $1 million because the town had to provide the infrastructure into a place where they had no sewers. And that's a real fear for the southern slope.
Right, I mean, here in Holmdel, you know, we're challenged by a variety of issues, and I do understand some of the comments that, you know, all these projects are always pushed into North Holmdel, and I understand the concern associated with it. However, in order for a project to satisfy the criteria as being appropriate, there needs to be sewer. And you're only sewered in a specific portion of the town. So, you know, that limits you in terms of where these sites can go, because they need to have access to sewer. So, yes, I see that there's tons of developable land in the southern portion of the township, but the town has taken a very hard line in terms of where they'll allow sewer, where they don't allow sewer, and that whole southern slope is not in the sewer service area, and so therefore would not meet the criteria for an affordable housing project. So that's why a lot of, you know, all the sites are in the northern section of town, because that's where the infrastructure exists and the sewer service area exists. It's not so much just the sewer in the ground, but you have to be in the sewer service area.
But if we didn't have immunity from builder's remedy, the court could order the township to take action to extend sewer to the areas where you don't. So again, approving this really keeps control here in town, and doesn't allow developers and judges in Freehold to tell you where and how you're going to do it.
Jen, when you gave the figures, you said this round. Should we anticipate more rounds?
Oh, yes.
And when
So this
would you
round
think-
ends in 2025. It's technically, it started in 1999, but there was this period of time where there was no Council on Affordable Housing. There were no new regulations. The regulations were presented but never approved. So there was like a 10-year period where nothing was happening. In 2015, the courts then took control of the circumstance, and the Supreme Court put out a ruling that said this is now being handled by the courts, which is kind of what Andy was referring to. In 2015, in order to participate, to make sure you have immunity and you can control your own destiny, you have to file a declaratory judgment action and declare that you're a participating town, which is what we've done. This settlement and this housing element that's part of this whole process is basically the culmination of almost 5 years worth of work. I guess it's about 4.5 years at this point.
Right now.
Right? So the period ends in 2025. I'm hopeful, I mean, he probably might laugh at me, but that at some point the legislature is going to do something
Please.
to take this process out of control of the court system, because before it was handled by the DCA, but because the DCA couldn't adopt new rules, the court then took it back. So where we are at this point in the court, because there was no action for a long period of time, Fair Share Housing Center, filed all kinds of litigation. The Supreme Court then ultimately ruled this is the process for this particular round, which technically is round 3, but we're calling it what, 3 and 4? Is that what we're calling it? Because historically the rounds were 6 years, but this round started in 1989 and is ending in 2025, which is why in most instances the numbers are higher than towns have been required to comply with historically, because this is a 25-year period of time versus a 6-year period of time. So in my opinion, a 297 unit obligation over 25 years is pretty good. I have a lot of towns that are well in excess of 1,000 units. So, but yes, unless there's some, it's in the New Jersey Constitution as well, the Fair Housing Act. It's a constitutional obligation to provide housing for low to moderate income households. So unless there's constitutional amendment or some kind of legislation, this is the path that we're on.
Any other questions for
Yeah,
Andy?
well-
Go ahead.
I'm a simple guy, so
Sure.
what I'm hearing here is, we don't vote, yes, we're screwed.
You are correct.
Right, okay, so.
Yes.
Pretty much, yes.
That would be a very, yes,
And
absolutely.
secondly, the location of where we put this is limited based on where our infrastructure is,
Correct.
right? So we don't
Absolutely.
have a lot of options of where they can go, right?
Well, again, yeah, we couldn't, there were negotiations with developers through the court process over many years, which has culminated in what's before you. But you need, the development has to be approvable, developable. You need, you can't, you need enough land, you can't build in wetlands, you need sewer, right? And we also try to, conform the developments to your existing regulations here in Holmdel in terms of height, right?
The best we could.
The best we could. So, yeah, these were negotiated sites based on where infrastructure is available.
And ultimately, the owners of those properties have to want to sell as well,
Correct.
too, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just simply, we want to put them at this location. We had a number of individuals come forward saying, we can solve your problems, and then present us with proposals, which were presented over time to the township committee, who ultimately decided that these are the sites that are the least objectionable. Is that fair? Right? I mean, there were a couple other locations, and I'll just bring this up. Potter Farm was one of them, right? So it's right after you come off the Parkway on 114. It's right in front of you. There was a proposal there. Initially, there was thoughts that it was maybe okay, but ultimately, it was determined that that's not the first. That is not what the town wants the first view of Holmdel to be when you come off the Parkway. They don't want development, like a big housing development there. They want something that is more representative. And so they were represented by council as well. So because we're a participant in the process, the township gets to determine how to satisfy their obligations. I mean, there are definitely a lot of rules and regulations dictating what's okay and what's not okay, but within the bounds of those rules, the town gets to decide how they want to satisfy their obligation. So in this particular instance, it was this site and another site that was deemed not appropriate, so they were not included. They still participated in the process. They were at that fairness hearing that Andy had referred to, where we were there for the whole day. But again, it's the town, because we're a participant and we have immunity, and we've continued to participate in the process, we're afforded the opportunity to put forth a plan from the town's perspective as opposed to being
We can
dictated.
control it.
Correct.
We don't-
But at the same time, we still have to have willing landowners, as Joe had indicated, and developers that are willing to build affordable units, in the areas that are available. So it's not simply, we just decided this is where it's gonna go. Of the people that came to us, this is the best,
Yeah, and this
Option.
land that we have, there's 2 properties now we're talking about?
total 3 properties.
3, and that's just for this round. So when we go
Correct.
to the next round, we gotta get how many more? Like,
We don't know yet, we don't know what the numbers are yet.
Yeah, and we don't know what that again, we don't know what that process will be. It may be the same, it could be different, and, if there's,
Why
we're
don't
running
you
out of.
explain how they sometimes come up with the number that you have to have,
I mean,
as best you can?
it's a very complicated
The
formula.
more houses you have, the less houses you need.
It's a very complicated formula. It's to the point where, you would need, an absolute.
Right, the
dedication.
municipalities had an economist from Philadelphia who was their expert, who issued 4 reports, each one about 3 inches thick, on methodology, and as to how that methodology should be determined. And the Fair Share had their own expert that did the same thing, so there was like 4 volumes of experts, and ultimately, partially it's based on vacant land, partially it's based on population, it's based on how many low and moderate income households are in your region, were in your region, how many are projected to be in your region, and they mix all that together and they say, here's your number.
So it might, right now, it's almost 400, so the next round, who knows what it'll be, but similar, because we're meeting our obligation, we will have some left over. It might not be.
We don't have any left over
next
next
time.
proposal.
And we have the land
We're
for
at the
that?
number.
Well, we may not, that's the whole,
That's
that's the whole point. So like, for instance, if land is declared, if it's open space or farmland preserved, then it doesn't count towards, then you can't build there.
Andy, the Wacott Creek watershed is subject and protected by, it's the New Jersey Coastal Area Facility Review Act, and also subject to also various other environmental protections. Palmer Avenue is in that Wacott Creek watershed. Palmer Avenue is also prone to flooding. Historically, has been prone to flooding in the past. How would you tell people that live in that area, in that development, in that community, that the builder has, or the developer has been granted DEP permits? How do you respond to that?
I mean,
Let me just start. So a couple things. One is, this was the subject of the 8-hour fairness hearing
correct.
before Judge Grasso Jones in Freehold. There was expert from Palmer Square who testified, Jennifer testified, and
The developers, experts.
the developers, Palmer Avenue developers expert testified as well. And ultimately, after considering all that expert testimony, Judge Jones found that the project as proposed, the 60 units, was developable, notwithstanding the environmental constraints you're speaking about. And Jen has reported to us that the developer has obtained their DEP permits to build the 60 units within the confines of New Jersey's environmental laws. So notwithstanding all those issues, there's enough, they're meeting their obligations under state law that will allow them to construct the 60 units.
Andy, towns that are fully developed, how do they meet their obligations?
So like we could use an example of like a shore town like Spring Lake or something, Monmouth Beach or something like that. So their numbers are actually pretty high, their affordable housing obligation numbers. But what they do is under the regulations and the law, there's something called a vacant land adjustment. So if your obligation is 300, but your town is completely built out, there's a formula in COA's regulations which still is valid and applies, and you go through that exercise, the planner does, and ultimately they get those towns get a vacant land adjustment. So in Spring Lake's case, their obligation was reduced to 0, for the third round because they were completely built out. But what those towns then have to, and Monmouth Beach was reduced to like 4 or 8, something like that. But what they have to do under the law is those township committees have to adopt overlay zoning, so that if a block in Spring Lake is knocked down and a developer wants to build multi-family housing there, they then would have to provide an affordable. I don't think that's very realistic given the value of land in those towns, but theoretically, if somebody wanted to do that, they would have to provide affordable housing as part of that project. So the number gets reduced, but it doesn't go away. So it's sort of hanging out there, and so if there's a change or if there's a redevelopment in the town, then that developer would have to provide some affordable housing as a component of a new project.
Yes, thank you.
Jen, you want to do your?
Sure. So, kind of bringing it back to the public hearing for this evening, we have a master plan reexamination and the housing element and fair share plan. So, a couple of things with respect to the reexamination report. Municipalities obligated under the municipal land use law to reexamine their master plan every 10 years. And this is a little of a different circumstance because we have been before Judge Jones, or Grasso Jones, for the course of the past, year almost? Because she took over from Judge Perry, but
This past
so
July.
as part of her directive to implement the settlement agreement, we were directed to do a reexamination report and a housing element and fair share plan. So that's what's before you. So a re-exam report under the MLUL basically is a look back on your master plan that you had adopted 10 years prior or less than that, if that's the case. In this particular case, it's 10 years prior. And there's 5 items in a re-exam, major problems and objectives relating to land development, the extent to which such problems have been reduced, have there been significant changes, any specific changes with respect to the master plan development regulations, and are there any opportunities for redevelopment? In looking back, as I don't know how many of you guys were here, I know Serena, you were here, maybe Bob, you were here during the last iteration of the master plan. I don't know if anybody else was here at the time, but the re-exam that was done, and it was a re-exam that we did, but it was more comprehensive than most comprehensive master plans that are done by any town. And we took a very hard look at everything, and I would say that the issues that are facing the township are relatively consistent with what they were, 10 years ago. We don't really have major new issues. I mean, obviously, the one big change that's taken place over the course of the past 10 years is Lucent, the redevelopment plan having been approved, the building, being leased up, and there's going to be roadway modifications to accommodate any potential traffic. But generally, the overall land use initiatives in the town, open space preservation, farmland preservation, preserving the character of the community, preserving neighborhoods, that has remained consistent. So the one big change that we're facing today is the implementation of the housing element and fair share plan. So I know we talked about it kind of indirectly, right? Andy stole my thunder as he usually does. So Mr. I don't do math goes in there and does all these calculations. So here we are in almost 2020, at the very end of 2019. This process jump-started again. Mr. Foster brought it up. What round are we in? Technically, we're in round 3, which, round 2 ended in 1999. So this process has, in theory, been going on for 19, almost 20 years to get to where we are. We filed a declaratory judgment action in July of 2015, consistent with the order coming down from the Supreme Court, which says we're participating. At the time, I don't really think the court order anticipated how complicated this process was going to be, because they expected us to be done by December of that year?
6 months.
Yeah.
4.5 years later.
Yeah, here we are. So
at that time, we were racing before the court to get the process done in 6 months, and then here we are. It was crazy.
So Fair Share Housing Center had an expert, Dr. Kinsey, go through the methodology, which you need, you know, security clearance to figure it out. And he allocated obligation to every town within the state of New Jersey. There were definitely flaws in his initial methodology. I think he used the median of the Garden State Parkway as developable property here in Holmdel. There were definitely issues that came up through the process, and there were adjustments made periodically starting in 2015 and going forward. We entered into an initial settlement agreement, I think it was in 2017, at the 297 number, and as Andy had indicated earlier, the obligation was almost 400, and at that point, when you would enter into early negotiations with Fair Share Housing Center, who is a non-profit affordable housing advocacy law firm. They say group, I say law firm, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but they're all lawyers, so I don't know what else to call them. So, okay, so,
Comment.
right.
I don't think their board's all lawyers, but we all deal with them lawyers.
So, unlike in the past, this particular process, Fair Share Housing Center has now been given a seat at the table in every single town's process. In the past, they would have to actually actively intervene or, you know, become part of the process where they felt it was necessary. Here, they're at the table for every single town. So we've been going back and forth with them since 2015, but they had agreed to reduce their initial number for us, I think it was 30% because we were in pretty early on, to the 297 number. Now, you guys may think that that's a huge number. I can assure you that given the number of clients that I have, not only here in Monmouth County, but statewide, this is probably one of the least, like for example, I represent the borough of Manasquan. Manasquan's number was in the 400s. It was like 480. Manasquan, which is like 1 square mile. So for us to be able to settle at 297 was an initial victory, minor as it may be, but victory nonetheless. So then it becomes our obligation to figure out how to satisfy that 297 number. In addition to the 297, I just want to throw out there that the township has an obligation to rehabilitate 37 units between now and 2025. We have to provide an opportunity for 37 units to be rehabilitated. We don't have to physically do the 37 units, but we participate in the county's process. You have a very good administrative agent in community grants and planning that handles those kinds of things as well. So that's a rehab obligation separate and apart from the 297 number. 297 is considered quote unquote new construction. So the first thing that we did, which I brought up earlier, was look at what we have currently here. So we had a 4-unit surplus from the prior round, which by the way, the prior round, which was 87 to 99, was 768 unit obligation. So this is significantly less than that. So we had a 4-unit surplus from that round, which we can carry forward. So these units don't evaporate. Like if there's extras, we get to count them moving forward. So we have a 4-unit surplus from the prior round. The township committee at the time, and this is going back several years, correct? Decided
really
to,
great mayor. Go ahead.
amazing mayor at the time. I won't mention who she was.
A genuine leader.
When the deed restrictions expire, and if they expire during the course of quote unquote this round, which is great because it's 25 years, if you can get the property owner to agree to extend the deed restriction, you get to take credit for that unit again. So 100 units were extended. And unlike many towns that say they're gonna do this, we've already done it and the deeds have already been filed. So this is something that's already been done, money's already been transferred, those units have already been put on it back in our plan. So that's another 100 units. Group home came in on Stillwell, which I know at the time created a lot of concern, 15 beds, but we get credit for those beds. So we're getting credit for those 15 beds, plus Meridian has an obligation to provide Medicaid beds, and you get credit on affordable housing for those Medicaid beds. So those units calculate out to 130 credits. As I said, up to 25% of your obligation, you can get a 2-for-1 bonus credit on family rental units. So we can take credit for 74 family rental bonuses, which we do. So when all of that is said and done, we need to come up with 93 units. And the township has done this on 3 sites. Let's talk about Middle Road. Middle Road is on the border of Hazlet. It's basically a triangular shaped property, about 5 acres, located at the intersection of Middle Road and Laurel Avenue. Unlike every other piece of property in town, this site is regulated by CAFRA, which is very unusual for a community that's this far from the coast. CAFRA regulates coverage. So the site is split between what they call a planning area 2, which maxes out 30% coverage, and a planning area 1, which allows 80% coverage. The Township Committee has met with an affordable housing developer who has gone to the DEP asking them to maybe average the coverage over the total site. DEP said no. So 80% in the PA1, 30% in the PA2, but we are now in the process, and Andy has filed paperwork with the court for the township to condemn that piece of property through eminent domain for affordable housing purposes for 100% affordable housing, 50-unit rental family project. Were you gonna say something?
I was just going to add, we were talking about that site back in 2008.
And 5 earlier than that
And
too.
for the same kind of project with a different developer. So it's been around.
And it was the reason why we were part of another thing at the county, that when they saw what it was, they were like, all right, you're out. Right, Ralph, we were constantly getting dragged into this meeting in the county. And then finally we were like, and they said, all right, forget it, you're out.
So that project.
Jennifer, I have a question.
Sure.
So you said CAFRA or DEP said no to the average.
Correct.
And then you went to eminent domain. Does that mean you can average?
No. So the developer has to comply with the coverage requirements based upon the line where the planning area changes from 1 to 2. And we've seen a concept which they can do it. It just pushes the development really to one side of the site, basically, because the other side is the PA2. But the eminent domain came into the fact that this particular developer came to us and has been part of the plans, as Andy had said, for years and years and years. In the initial iteration back in 2017, they were going to do this as an inclusionary development, which means it's 80% market rate, 20% affordable, where we would only get 10 affordable credits out of the site, which would require another project. In discussions with the Township Committee, we felt that in this particular instance, it made sense to do a 100% affordable project here, which would get us 50 credits plus 50 bonus credits, so 100 credits, which before we were getting 10, maybe 20. So Andy has
on the sites that on the hazard report.
Yeah, the easternmost property line of that site is the border between Holmdel and Hazlet.
It's like behind P&P Sweet Shop.
Pretty much, yes.
Across from Arnold Walter Nursing Home.
Yes.
You want to orient yourself.
Jen,
So was this a
indicate that
friendly-
affordable is a valid reason for eminent domain.
Correct. It has been
So,
adjudicated, and I'm sure Andy
well,
will step
Not quite-
in.
Not quite yet.
Well, our
Yeah.
particular issue, but
Yeah.
condemning property for affordable housing has been
Yes.
adjudicated, and it is a public purpose for which you can condemn property.
Yep, so that's, as Jen pointed out, is pending before Judge Thornton in Monmouth County. We're actually supposed to be before the judge on Friday, where we would expect, and there's no objection to the taking. So that there'll be a court order saying that we are able to take the property for Mount Laurel purposes.
Jim, you say it's going to be a family rental unit. What
Correct.
exactly does that mean?
That means it's not age restricted. So it's for non-age restricted purposes. Age restricted is 55 and over. You're limited to how many senior units you can provide as far as affordable housing. And I will tell you that unless you have a good number of family rental units in your plan, Fair Share will not settle. they want family rental units, meaning it could be a single mother with one kid. That's considered a family. It's just not age restricted, and they're rentals. I can tell you that every single 100% affordable project that I have had experience with, which is a significant number, not one of them has been for sale. Every single one of them is for rent because they're eligible for low-income tax credits through the federal government, and there's a whole process through the HMFA in terms of qualifying for tax credits and getting awarded the project, and they're all rental projects. And I will tell you that I know that there's generally a preconception that rental is less than home ownership, right? With respect to affordable housing, that is not the case. Because when you have a rental project, if someone is not taking care of their property, the tenant, there is an entity to go to resolve it. If I own the house and I don't feel like painting my house and the paint is peeling off, there's nothing you can do about it. So in terms of maintenance, care, keeping the project up, keeping the property up, a rental project has more avenues for a township to make sure that the project stays looking good and operating correctly than a home ownership project. And in a lot of the communities that I work in that have a high number of home ownership units, I spend a significant amount of time dealing with foreclosures. Because if it goes into foreclosure and the property gets sold to somebody else, you lose the credit, then you have to come up with the credit somewhere else. So that's an issue that has required a significant amount of legal attention and attention to make sure that the projects don't go to sheriff's sale, don't get sold to somebody else, stay within the deed restriction. It's a big issue.
So what happens if you have 50 rental units and
Yeah.
only 30 of them are rented?
That's not going to be an issue here, I can guarantee it.
And whose
But that's
decision
not
is
our
it?
problem
It's not our
either.
problem. It's not like the homes. It doesn't
No.
matter.
Whose
It's not our
decision
problem.
is it, whether it's rental or ownership?
Well, that was part of our settlement arrangement with Fair Share. So what we were trying to do for the township is we pointed out, maximize bonus credits so you have less housing. So as for rental, you get a 2-for-1 credit. So on this Middle Road site, it's 50 units, but we're getting 100 credits towards the 297. So that's a discussion that's gone on with the developers for each of the projects, whether they're for sale or
So
rental.
kind of negotiated? to
Yeah.
a degree?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So it's all family, so like a one-bedroom, a single person can't rent that apartment then?
A single person can rent a 1-bedroom apartment. A
Okay.
single person cannot rent a 3-bedroom apartment.
Right, there's
So
a lot of restrictions.
there's a lot of restrictions in terms of who's eligible, which is why you have your administrative agent. You know, if you have a 2-bedroom apartment, a couple can rent it, but if you're a family of 7, you're not eligible to rent that. So there's restrictions as far as occupancy of the units, but they will not allow a 3-bedroom unit, which is required under the UHAC rules, 20% to be 3 bedrooms. You can't rent a 3-bedroom unit to a single person because there are families that need the units.
Right, you can't rent a 2-bedroom to a single person either.
Correct. It's a one bedroom. And I will tell you that there have been representations made to me, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, from Community Grants and Planning, that the wait list for units here in Holmdel was upwards of like 4,000 people.
Well, I don't know.
There's also monetary dollars attached for each. You know,
The size of your household dictates your, so low income is not a hard and fast number, right? It's not like black and white. It's based upon the size of your household. So the larger your household, the higher the amount that's eligible in terms of low income and moderate income. And you're in Region 4, which is Monmouth, Ocean, Mercer, so it's a combined per capita income for the entire region. So there's some affluent communities in that region, and then there's some not so affluent communities in that region, and it balances out. But there used to be, through the DCA, income limits that get issued annually, that showed what, by region, what is the median income, what's low, what's moderate, what's very low, based upon your household size. when COA went defunct, that kind of went by the wayside. The last one that they issued was 2014, but Fair Share and a conglomerate of individuals have started to do it again and have started releasing, I think in 2017 was the first one, 2018, I don't know if they've done one this year.
It's prepared by the Affordable Housing Professionals Association of New Jersey. They've developed the income chart, and there's a 2018 chart.
And so, which is a good thing because it has increased the household income that's eligible each year. So if we were using 2014 numbers, there are individuals that are like on the border but a little too high that would not qualify, that will now qualify under the updated numbers. And the court system has, we've included those in our settlement agreements, right? The income.
Yes.
So when the settlement agreement gets approved by the court, the updated income limits also get approved. So it's dictated by the state what the income limits are by household.
If a family member who qualifies all of a sudden wins the lottery, are they forced out?
No.
They can stay there forever?
You could be
Forever.
Yep.
You could stay there forever as long as you live in the unit. You have to live in the unit.
Okay.
You can't rent it. If it's a for sale unit, you can't rent it, but you have to live there.
The rentals have to reapply every 5, because the rental has to reapply.
I think at the term, whatever the terms of their lease are, so I don't know what.
Yes, on
they
the
have to
term of the lease,
requalify.
you have to requalify if you rent.
But
But if you purchase, then you can hit the lottery the very
Correct.
next day and stay there until.
the end of your lease, basically.
Okay, so for the middle road, that's rental. They
Right.
can
Correct.
leave after the 5-year period if they're found.
Or whatever their
to be
lease is, so every time, so I would assume that their lease would
Probably annual.
Annually?
I would say annual.
So they have to re-up, right? And that's why I, personally, I feel like it's a little bit unfair if you can buy a house and then hit the lottery, but you can't if you rent a house and not that you want to live there if you're renting, but.
But the one thing I will say, which is not really the case in our plan because all of our affordable units that we're proposing are rental units, but in the event that it's a for sale rental unit, there's a limit to how much you can sell it for. So you own it for 30 years and then you're only allowed to sell it for 5% over the max sale price, 5% over the max sale price that's set by this calculation. Any dollar made above that max sale price comes to the town, which is also why banks do not like to sign mortgages because they're not the right of first refusal. The town is first and then the bank is second. So the banks historically have been difficult, especially on low income units, in issuing mortgages because even if the unit goes into foreclosure, the first name is the town and then the bank. So it becomes a little cumbersome for them at that point.
Extremely challenging to get more.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it wasn't years back, but after this last bust, the banks are, we have had experience where there were senior for sale projects, one in particular that comes to mind in Howell, where the developer was begging the town to allow them to transition the project from rental from for sale to rental because he couldn't sell the units. So it would, so I know rental gives me a little concerned, but from an affordable standpoint, there's a lot more control over who occupies it. There's a lot of background checks that go into it, and
People are denied.
correct, they are. But I also want to note that individuals that occupy these units have to have income. It's not like they can just go in there and say, I want to live here, I have no income. That's not the case. Affordable housing in Section 8 is not the same thing. So I know that that's also a concern, but that's not correct. They actually have to demonstrate that they have the ability to pay the rent, they have steady income, all their assets are evaluated, so it's a big process that goes through.
Right, so that's middle road, go ahead.
Okay, so next. So there's a property on Route 35 that is on 35, I want to say north, it could be west. I know that the directions on 35 are kind of weird, but it's basically the property immediately next to Kohl's. The property is a reverse flag, so it goes deep, 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 and then widens out towards Hazlitt, basically. That arm is almost 100% wet. So the proposal is 40,000 square feet of commercial along Route 35, 2 stories, about 600 feet back is going to be a residential project of 170 units. It's going to be 3 stories over parking. And the township will get 31 affordable family rental units out of that project. The developer has indicated to us, meaning Andy and myself, that the market rate units at that project will be for sale. So the only units in that project that will be rental will be the affordable units.
That's the developer's intention.
That's the developer's intention at this point. Quite frankly, when we're in the negotiations of all these projects, Fair Share Housing Center really does not care all that much about the market rate units. They're more concerned about the affordable units and the fact that they're family rentals. So that's a 31 unit family rental project on Route 35, immediately behind the Kohl's. Backs up to a park in Hazlet. It is on Route 35 North. And the project is about 600 feet back from 35 because the commercial piece and the parking lot for the commercial is along the 35 corridor.
And the access will be from 35?
Correct. There's no access from anywhere other than 35. The developer has provided us with a current LOI. I know that there was some concern over the years about the fact that there are significant wetlands on that property. They have a current LOI. I actually kind of went at the attorney for that project recently about upping it, but they do still have several years on their existing LOI where it's current, and the development envelope is outside of that area. So they are able to develop that. It is developable. That will be the subject of a new hearing before the court because that site initially was not included in the project, in the plan. This is a new project that has been put in the plan in place of the project on North Beer Street.
So that'll require a zoning change to
Correct.
divide it between residential and commercial?
So the regulations that came out of COA, which are still valid, the round 2 regs, require towns to zone properties included in their housing plan for affordable housing for those projects. Because what has happened historically is towns have put all these projects in their plan and they never zoned for them, so then they go to the zoning board and get denied. So now the regulations require that the zoning be put in place. The zoning ordinance for that Route 35 site was introduced, Mike, I don't remember the date it was introduced, in November, correct? Mid-November, like the 12th or something? And the public hearing for that ordinance is scheduled for next Tuesday night.
So they'll have to subdivide it, or is it going to be one lot?
No subdivided, just one lot.
And it with 2 different zones?
It's gonna be, the zoning is going
It's gonna have
to,
commercial in the front.
it's gonna address the location of where each individual use type goes. There's not a proposed subdivision, and there's not gonna be 2 separate proposals, it's one project.
So do we have other lots that are dually zoned in town?
It's not duly zoned. It's considered mixed use, I mean.
Okay, got it, thanks.
And in this particular instance, you know, the town is obligated to zone specific to the project per the requirements. So whereas in other areas that might not work, in this particular area, the zoning will reflect what the proposal is. And then the last project, which I'm sure you guys are all intimately familiar with, is the property on Palmer Avenue, right? So it was before the board several years ago for a 100% affordable project,
2015.
which was denied by the planning board for a variety of reasons. They've come back. Now, at that time, it was 100% affordable where they were not RSIS compliant and there were some issues associated with it. This particular proposal, which is 60 total units, 12 will be affordable, it will be a family rental project. The developer, understanding the challenges associated with the site, knowing the history, has already gone to the DEP, secured their flood hazard permit, secured their LOI, so their buffers and their development envelope has been already set. They've received those this year, so they're current. And so the proposal now is to have 3 stories over parking, as opposed to not being RSIS compliant, is now RSIS compliant, and the project has their DEP approvals in hand. So we know, as opposed to historically where people go to the DEP after the local process, and it's all speculative as far as the buffers and the development envelope, that's already been set, so they're ready to go. So between those 3